Today we're going to talk about LGBTQ plus all ages books, and I'm Chris from the Bowie Youth Services Department, and my pronouns are he, him.
And my name is Kelsey Hughes. I'm the librarian 3 at the South Bowie branch, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
I'm Rebecca Oxley. I'm the librarian 3 at the Greenbelt branch, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
So, to start off, we're gonna go through a few just kind of basic questions on our starts with LGBTQ literature, and then some recent books that we really enjoyed, maybe some older books that we enjoyed, and go on from there. So to start off, is there any recent LGBTQ plus book that you all enjoyed?
Well, I'm here to primarily talk about kids' graphic novels, but one that I read in the past year that was really great for tweens was called The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jess Wang, which explores some genderqueer identities. So there's this prince, and his family wants him to get married, but he has a secret double life as in drag as Lady Crystalia. So he goes out into the balls of Paris, and he's like this fashion icon. But the whole thing is the weight of the secret is what starts to affect the friendship between the prince and the dressmaker.
Oh, cool. I think I've seen some of the pictures from that, but I haven't read it.
I really loved that one. The art was great. For me, one book that I've really loved recently is I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. So primarily I read YA, older YA. So that's some of the books that I'll be talking about today. But I Wish You All the Best is a really, really excellent recent release about a genderqueer teen. There's also a lot of learning about family and understanding all different kinds of relationships that we have, and learning how to understand them, repair them when we can, and set boundaries for ourselves when we can't. And so I really enjoyed that one. I found it to be a very thoughtful and complex exploration of these topics, and also just very addictive. It's one that I read very quickly.
Cool. Recent one I actually just finished 2 days ago. Felix Ever After by Kaysen Collender. It's excuse me. It's about a Black trans teen in New York. He is trying to deal with a kind of like a scholarship competition at his art school, and he's trying to deal with the fact that an kind of enemy is vying for the same scholarship, and then his Instagram is hacked, and his pre-transition photos and his dead name are plastered in the school lobby. So then he's trying to figure out who would do this to him. He thinks it's one person, but then in kind of doing a convoluted kind of fake account to try to figure out, to try to get the person to admit what they did, he gets to know them better, realizes they may not be the bad person he thought that they were. But then it takes place in New York like a month before the Pride March in June, and everybody at his school, it's this kind of like very diverse group of queer non-white teens, but at the same time no one's quite perfect. Like, they have their infights and their different perceptions. There's transphobia brought up within the cis gay community, and the character of Felix is also trying to struggle with kind of the evolving nature of his identity. And so I liked that it didn't present the characters as being like perfect, but they all have their positives and their negatives. And it's just I felt like a very kind of modern, more unique look at what it is to be an LGBTQ teen today.
I feel like Case and Calendar is so good at that. Their other book, This Is Kind of an Epic Love Story, is one that I read not too long ago. And similarly, there's so many different characters, there's so many different identities within the book. They're all at different stages of, understanding that identity and being comfortable with it. But it does feel very modern and very, very kind of forward thinking. None of the characters are like I don't know. Yeah, I just agree. There's just a very contemporary feel to Case and Calendar's works, which is really refreshing.
This is my first one by them, so I'll have to check out the others.
Yeah, and I like that one too because there's also a main character who's deaf. So Calendar
Cool.
really thinks through like a lot of different ways to be representative and highlight diverse perspectives.
I know you guys are both YA fans, so have any of you read Check Please?
I love Check
By
Please so
Ngozi Ukazu.
much.
I
Is that
know.
the hockey one?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay.
I
I
absolutely love Check Please. I think it started off as a web comic, and oh, you have a signed copy?
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, she's delightful. I met her at the Small Press Expo a couple years back, and I'm just like so blown away by how wholesome and just life affirming that that series is, and it's fun to watch them grow up.
Yeah, and I'm a huge hockey fan, so like that's like another level of fun for me. But yeah, it's just like so like sweet and lovely and wonderful. And the second book in the 2-part series just came out, and that one was like also just as good. They're just so great. So warm. They just make you feel so warm and wonderful. And I should say too, so I did our YA book talk a couple weeks ago, and I talked about a lot of LGBT books there too. So if you're looking for even more recommendations after this one, I did talk about Check Please there too. So it's one I've really loved.
So Rebecca, like, is there something you think that like the graphic novels are doing differently or better than like the prose books?
Well, you know what I'm just saying about graphic literature for juveniles is that it's so prolific. There are just so many wonderful titles out there that are showing either queer children or the queer parents of children, and normalizing these storylines, and not we have things like drama, which drama is like the quintessential youth LGBTQ graphic novel. But largely it centers around like the controversy of things. And one thing I love about most juvenile graphic novels that are LGBTQ is that there's a normalization of things. There's a validation that's there that you don't necessarily see when there's a conflict because of that.
They let the characters just exist as they are without piling on the phobias of the world.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's like one of the things I love about Lumberjanes by Noelle Stevenson. Lumberjanes is about a bunch of girls who go to a girls' camp for hardcore lady types, and there is a trans character who takes their time coming out, and there are 2 queer characters in it as well.
Oh, cool.
But the story doesn't really center around that. That's just sort of like a feature, not a bug.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay, so any other recent books we want to recommend, or do we want to go on to other topics and circle back?
Yeah, let's see where it takes us.
So are there any tropes or recycled plots that we're not fans of seeing anymore in the LGBTQ youth books?
Well, for me, I have to say that luckily in the graphic literature landscape, that we don't see a ton of tropes. We don't see a ton of stereotypes. It's very organic and normal. So, I mean, that's something to say for sure, that
Hmm.
you don't see a lot of recycled tropes. So I'm glad to see that these examples are not being hammered into kids' heads.
Yeah, for me, I would say the one thing that comes to mind is the like culminating musical. I feel like there was a time when like most LGBT books, Simon and the Homo Sapiens Agenda comes to mind, Gracefully Grayson. I'm sure there are others. It just felt like every LGBT book I was reading, it was like building to a year-end musical. And I love a musical, but I just feel like there's other things that LGBT folks are interested in too. So I haven't seen it as much anymore, but there was definitely a time where I just felt like the musical was like the only plot device. Um, yeah.
There haven't been as so many tropes that whenever I've read, I've always tried to go by the guideline that what might work for one kid might not work for another kid. Um, but like one thing I did really enjoy with Felix Ever After too is there was such a wide diversity of queer non-white kids. Felix is a Black trans kid. His friend is a pan Black Bengali kid. There's a biracial Black white gay kid. But with all the issues of like transphobia within the cis gay world that comes up in the book, their character's race is kind of like an unremarked positive. Like just the fact that there's this huge, diverse, non-white cast of queer kids, but no one's attacked much racially. It's just kind of the everyday diversity of New York, all these cultures coming together and living alongside each other.
Mhm.
Nice.
So let's see. Um, so with our own reading experiences, were there any youth titles with LGBTQ plus themes or content that we remembered having an early impact on us, or that maybe we would recommend for someone just getting into that aspect of their identity?
Chris and I were talking a little bit before this about Boy Meets Boy by David Levithan, which I have here. That's one of the first books I remember having an impact on me when I was in high school, maybe early college, because there just weren't, we were talking about there just weren't really a lot of LGBT youth books when we were growing up. But what I like about Boy Meets Boy is it does the same kinds of things that we were just talking about with some of the other books where the characters being LGBT, you know, like they're all comfortable in their identity, and like they live in a world where the outside world is comfortable with folks having different sexualities and different gender expression. And so it's just like a more positive view than like you often see in LGBT books where people are having to kind of struggle to come out and understand their identity, which is important. It's an important story to tell, but it's also nice to have a story where like folks are just accepted and appreciated and able to express themselves in a safe way. And so I remember that having such an important impact on me when I was growing up to see that and see that valued.
I'm going to date myself a little bit because I'm a 1980 baby. And when I was growing up or when I was a young teenager, there really weren't any queer books that were written for young people that I had access to, that I was able to get my hands on. So there was nothing that really spoke to me, especially when I was very young. My first encounter with LGBTQ characters came from reading The Sandman when I was around 12 or 13, I was definitely too young to be reading that, but I was a big comics reader. So I had gotten it in a grab bag. And when I read it, I was just like, what is this? Like, I didn't know that comics could be this. Um, so, but I would say that one of the early ones that I read in college that made an impact on me was Astronaut Academy by Dave Roman. Um, in it, it's just a series of vignettes about kids being kids in this astronaut academy. He really perfectly captures what it's like to be a child, but it had an inclusion of a gay character in it, which I had never seen in a children's book before.
Cool. Kind of the same thing with the dating. I was born in 1983. So again, all of my first experiences of LGBTQ existence was more when I started reading adult novels and poetry and essays, and then just kind of going back and kind of seeking out, well, what does queer history mean for me, and what can I learn from those writers or artists that came before me. And so then when I did start seeing kind of, I guess, the rise of the YA queer genre, I actually remember the first time I went to DC Pride Fest. That usually happens the day after the parade. Alex Sanchez, who wrote the Rainbow Boys series, was there, and like I vaguely knew who he was, but I didn't really have any interest in it because I was a college student. I was like, oh, this is like a kid's book. But so then when I did start reading YA titles, it was more like kind of a critical, as an adult reading it, like, how would I feel, how would I have felt reading this as a kid? Some of them I liked, some of them I was more critical. I was like, I liked the positive representation, but as a story, it just didn't interest me.
Were there any, I know we're here to talk about books, but were there any shows that had an impact on you in understanding LGBT identity? Because for me, I keep thinking about Degrassi. That was a big one for me growing up, and seeing there were so many different characters there was a bi character, there were some gay characters, and so that was a first understanding for me of all the different kinds of identities. Were there any shows that existed that?
Yeah, definitely. For me, it was My So-Called Life with Ricky, and seeing like Ricky go through the struggles of like coming out and trying to live his truth. And I also had a crush on her best friend. So for me, it was like an awakening type of show.
Yeah, I remember when I was in college, someone my brother knew at his college ended up taping some of the episodes of Queer as Folk, the American
Nice.
version, and sending me these VHSs in the mail. And so that was just kind of like a big, like, wow, there's actually this a world out there, whether it was like a whatever kind of representation it was, the idea that there was almost like a separate gay world out there to discover. And then I also remember, again, this is going to date me, but PBS had a LGBT news magazine called In the Life that was on, I want to say like 10 or 11 p.m. on Fridays or Saturday nights. And it was just, that's again where I learned kind of like some historical stuff that I explored more. And actually, I remember they used to end with a kind of like candid op-ed from Harvey Fierstein
That's
every
cool.
episode.
I actually remember also because I grew up in Long Island, New York, so not far from New York City, and we used to get the Village Voice whenever we went to New York, and there was a series called Dykes to Watch Out For by Alison
Yeah.
Bechdel.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember loving reading that when I was a kid.
Yeah, I have Fun Home here too.
Oh, gotta love
Nice.
Fun Home. Did you see the musical?
I haven't. I
I
need
was
to.
I was very fortunate. I went and saw it in San Antonio when I was visiting my mother, and it was really touching.
Mm.
Um, You just have to see it. The songs are really good. I know
I,
we were talking about being over musicaled, but
I mean, I still love a musical. I think too, what I love about what is so cool about Fun Home is I feel like it's become part of the classic canon. Like it's just such an important work, and I think the musical has helped even get it to that next level of like more national understanding. But I'm just so glad to see that see it get recognized, and see Alison Bechdel get recognized, because she's just so great.
yeah. Yep, she is a genius. She's a certified literal genius.
I remember loving too when I first read it. I mean, the thing that you can only get from a graphic novel, you know, first off, the story was just, you know, really intensely amazing and raw, but then also just her illustration, her drawing is beautiful. The way the lines just flow and the shading that she used in it, kind of the area of gray shading. I
Mm-hmm.
really respected that.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
monochrome blue wash that just
Mhm.
sort of um, filtered everything through the lens of recollection. I think really helped to make that memoir come home, even though I know that it was something that was pretty common during comics being printed at that time, because it saved a lot of money. But the one color monochrome tinting is, to me, just one of the really grounds you in the time and place.
It's really effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So, kind of thinking back a step, with the like tropes or recycled plots, are there any that we would see as a positive, like we want to see more?
Yeah, I know that this year one of the Black Eyed Susans is Cardboard Kingdom by Chad Sell. And in it there's a couple different instances, because it's about these kids that I mean, it's very cute. They basically just build these cardboard kingdoms for themselves, and they each have these personas, and they work on their cardboard costumes and everything. But there's a couple kids, like one boy who dresses up as a girl, and his persona is a girl, and she's a villain, and he takes some flack for dressing up as a girl. And then there's another young lady who calls herself the professor, and she dresses up with a mustache, and her poppy gets upset with her and says that, you know, that she's doing wrong and that she shouldn't do that. But then she's just like, but Poppy, I wear the mustache because you have a mustache.
Mm,
So I thought that was very sweet. And I, I definitely am hoping to see, and there's another kid that like is kind of questioning in the book too. And it's all just so lightly touched upon in this wonderful little fantasy world that they're building there. And I think that that's something that I want to see more of in kids graphic novels.
oh, that's really sweet.
Something that I've noticed is more exploration of like religion, and how either being religious or struggling with your faith connects with folks' LGBT identity. So I recently read Deposing Nathan by Zach Smedley, and that one is a lot about that character's kind of having a bit of a crisis between his faith and him realizing that he's bisexual. Um, One other, Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera, I recently read, and that it touches on that a little bit. And I think that's an important piece of identity, is the way our different kind of beliefs and identities intersect. And it's not really something I've seen really explored before
Hmm,
recently.
cool. One thing that I really liked in this book, Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazmian, is the fact that it goes into historical and generational issues, queer issues. It's set in the 1980s, and it's a um, Iranian kid who's just moved to New York with his family after the revolution in Iran,
Mm-hmm.
and he befriends a kind of queer activist kid who's also friends with a girl whose uncle is an activist in ACT UP, which was the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, and they were a group of queer and other activists who were trying to bring attention to the government and action on the AIDS crisis in the 80s and the 90s. And again, it's a fictional story, but I like that it goes back into queer history, which is something
Right.
you definitely see in adult fiction. But I think you're now just starting to see that in YA and juvenile.
Yeah, there's uh, I wish I had it with me. Music from Another World by Robin Talley is another like historical fiction exploring like the music scene and like the punk scene in the 80s.
Oh, cool.
And there's a main character who's a lesbian, and I haven't read it yet, but it's gotten good reviews and I'm excited to check it out. And I agree, like historical fiction is kind of an untapped area, I feel like, for LGBT history stories so far.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I I'm not really sure like where that would fit in with kids graphic novels, because there are some great history graphic novels for kids, like the Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales series, but they haven't really delved into queer life at all. It's just talking about history. But it would be interesting to see what that would look like through the lens of childhood, about learning, you know, that there is a history. I know that when my mom brought me up, she talked to me about, you know, that gay people had to fight for their rights. And so that was something that like I had a sense of, but not every child necessarily has that sense. And then for all the cis hetero kids out there too, they need to see that window to the world, where they can view history and see that that's part of the landscape of history, that LGBTQ history, is American history. So that would be something that I'd be really interested in seeing, maybe for tweens.
Well, and I think there could be so much power too in having, I mean, graphic novel format is such a great format for especially nonfiction, I feel like, because it can bring subjects that sometimes can be harder to get younger kids to read about and make it maybe a little more exciting. And I've been thinking a lot about how, especially some of the tactics that were used during the AIDS crisis to bring awareness to the issue um, and get folks access to the healthcare that they needed. Um, I feel like that could be really powerful and inspiring for teens to learn about those protests and learn about the techniques that were used, and draw comparisons to some of the protests that are happening today around, you know, Black Lives Matter and other, you know, important topics. I feel like there's so much rich understanding to be tapped into there. I feel like I would love to see someone really dive into that.
Yeah, and you can see the power of that through other media like Pose, where you have talking about ACT UP and die-ins and just the different things that people did. Um, yeah, it would be great to see a little more, um, even just LGBTQ memoirs. I would like to see that.
Yeah.
Kind of segueing in on that. I mean, I definitely agree that the fact that it's a direct descendant of the healthcare issues that ACT UP dealt with, that we're still dealing with today, that a lot of activists you read that have written on that in like adult memoirs, they say it's like, yes, these are linking issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ongoing struggle. But the thing with the cover of Felix with the kid with the crown, the flower crown on his head, and then this one by George M. Johnson, All Boys Aren't
Oh,
Blue. I just started it, but it is a memoir about his life as a queer Black teenager, and so I'm definitely looking forward to reading that, because it is, you know, it is. I've seen some. It does seem like kind of memoir seems to be the next kind of genre that they're approaching with queer YA. But then from what I've read with both covers, the the flower crown in the hair was supposed to be like a direct kind of nod homage to a famous photograph of Martha P. Johnson, who was one
Oh,
of the trans vanguards of the early post-Stonewall scene in New York.
awesome.
I will say one of the, going back to that question about what books were foundational to us, one of the books I do have is Transgender History by Susan Stryker. And it is an adult book, but I feel like there could be a lot of youth appeal. I mean, it's kind of old now, so there's a lot of history that needs to be updated, but yeah, that's another great one. I just was reminded of it
Cool.
as we were talking.
It looks familiar. I think I used to have it years ago.
Yeah, it's a really good, comprehensive, but still like, you know, quick read history to give you that like good, solid foundation.
So I guess in that, what books are we excited to read for the future? Whether it's something that we know is upcoming in publication, or it's been on our to read stack for a while.
Well, let's see. I have a confession to make. I have not read the books of the fabulous Katie O'Neill, except for Aquacorn Cove, but Princess Ever After and the Tea Dragon Society and the sequel to the Tea Dragon Society, I still have not actually read. So they're not that old. They're just a couple years old. Princess Ever After started off as a web comic, but now it's something that we have in the library. And the other thing is, I'm a huge fan of Steven Universe. And I have not read any of the comics. I've read a lot of Adventure Time comics. And there, as we know, there are some queer characters in Adventure Time, like Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, but it's not so overt. Whereas in Steven Universe, it is celebrated, you know, so fully.
Yeah.
Cool. I haven't heard of the Tea Dragon Society. I have to look that up.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. It's like a nice, like album sized. I wish I knew the publisher. I wonder if it's No Brow. I'm not sure.
So one book that I have two. One that I'm really excited about is Reverie by Ryan LaSala. I've been meaning to read it for a couple months now. One day I will get to it. But what I'm excited about is it's a fantasy novel. So again, like another area I feel like could be tapped into further. And this one just seems like it's really wild. Like there's the kind of the basis of the fantasy has to do with being able to control dreams, lucid dreaming. There's also like apparently drag queen fairy godmothers, and the main character has a charm bracelet that gives him magic powers. So there's just a lot of really interesting things happening. And Ryan LaSala has a really great Twitter presence, and I've been really enjoying reading his tweets and seeing him come alive. And this is his debut novel. So I know this is going to be a really fun one when I can get to it. And then the other one I wanted to share is one I think you may have already read, Chris, so maybe you could talk more about it, but Birthday by Meredith Russo.
Oh, yeah.
So Meredith Russo, they wrote If I Was Your Girl, right?
Yeah, that was her first novel.
Right. So one of the really groundbreaking YA novels about a trans character. And then this is a second one about, well, you know, Chris, do you want to talk about it since you've actually read it?
So it has an interesting structure in that it follows two best friends from, it's been a few months since I read it. I want to say it starts on their 10th birthday and goes up to their 18th birthday, and it alternates in chapters from their different points of view. And so it does, each chapter is their birthday, because they share the same birthday and they're lifelong best friends. I believe they're both growing up with kind of the pressure to play football in a small Texas town, and one of the characters is realizing that she's trans. And it's not a like lighthearted book, but there's, themes of friendship and acceptance. And of course, there's definitely some, trauma and ignorance going on too. But I actually liked it better than her first novel.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one.
I've been looking forward to, I just actually got this a day or two ago, The Weight of the Stars by Kay Ancrum. I just heard about it randomly, but it is space opera with a lesbian relationship at the center. And so I like that
Cool.
science fiction and fantasy with queer themes and characters is getting expansion. And it sounds like this one, I'm hoping that it's like the sexuality, again, is kind of like the part of the characters, but it's not the driving trauma of the characters. There's, and I'm hoping to see more of that in queer YA science fiction fantasy.
Yeah.
So let's see, are there any other books we're excited for, or any other books that kind of hit a chord going back through the years?
There's a book that I read when I was in grad school called Skim by Jillian Mariko Tamaki, and I remember that really blowing my mind, and it was part of one of the reasons why I became so adamant about starting a graphic novel award for the Black Eyed Susans, because I was like, here are all these great graphic novels that aren't getting nominated. And so my friend Matthew Winter and I started the first graphic novel category for grades 4 to 6, and it was expanded to 6 to 9. But when I read Skim, it just really resonated with me. First of all, the art has such a quietude to it, almost like ukiyo-e art. It's so complex, there's the obsession with tarot and just getting into the unexplained, which I remember from being a teenager also, and then this relationship with her teacher, and then discovering that she has lesbian impulses. It's just a really fantastic graphic novel, and you would find that in the teen section.
Cool. I think I read she wrote a run for She-Hulk within the last year or two, and I read some of that, and that was really good. She didn't illustrate with Skim. What did she write and illustrate?
No, I think that Mariko Tamaki did the illustrations and Jillian Tamaki did the writing, because they're cousins.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But Mariko Tamaki has a lot of great ones. There's another really good one for teens called Super Mutant Magic Academy, and it's told in vignettes, but there's queer characters there, and there's queer longing, which definitely resonated with me, because I definitely had the whole I have a crush on a straight girl when I was a teenager, and the loneliness that can come from that, I think, was well captured in this book.
One book I always recommend is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. It's just such a beautifully written, very complex YA book about two boys in New Mexico who have a very nuanced friendship that leads to something a little more complicated as the book goes on. But it's just such a beautiful story. And the thing that people always highlight when they talk about this book is that Lin-Manuel Miranda narrates the audiobook. And it's just adds a whole other level of wonderfulness and excellence to it. So it's just a great experience, and I always highly recommend the audiobook if you're going to read it.
I definitely second that. I'm very looking forward to the sequel whenever it's published.
Mm.
Me too. I actually did read that one and loved it.
So let's see. Did either of you have any thoughts on like what you hope to see for, I guess, for the genre as a whole? Like what directions you want to see it take in the future?
Well, I guess for kids graphic novels, I just want to see more of it. I want to see more LGBTQ representation. I want to see more nuanced stories. Like, I don't know if either of you read The Witch Boy,
That was
and
good,
then
yeah.
the sequel, The Hidden Witch by Molly Ostertag. And that was really great because, you know, here's somebody who's like in this very gendered, I don't want to say profession, but like life culture. And, you know, he's being let into the witch school. And then his best friend just very subtly has queer parents. So, you know, that's the kind of thing I want to see is, you know, just more representation. Everything sort of naturally blended in together. But as I mentioned before, I would love to see something historical, like maybe some nonfiction LGBTQ work for young children or tweens. I think that could be really enriching to the scope of what they're reading about, not to mention give them a little bit of history.
Yeah, I really liked what Ostrang did with Witch Boy. I've only read the first one, but I just liked that she just kind of like very definitely opened up the theme of not sequestering yourself to like binary gender roles, but it's also just a fun fantasy action adventure.
Yeah.
And I definitely second, I mean, across the board with, I mean, I'm liking that we're getting more historic, like some more memoirs by contemporary queer writers about their teenage years. But I also would be interested in seeing more historical overviews from like, I guess from a YA perspective or written for a YA audience, which you get some like informational kind of textbooks almost on stuff like that, but I'd be interested more in like personal narratives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Makes me think about like one thing I've noticed happening a lot in YA nonfiction in general is that there'll be like a YA version of an adult nonfiction novel. So they'll just kind of tweak it or condense it a little bit so it's a little bit more easily digestible for a younger audience. And I think that could be a good place to start to get some of these texts out there. David Francis' How to Survive a Plague comes to mind as a really great one that could be condensed into maybe a YA version of some sort. I don't know. I agree. There just needs to be more.
Yeah, I was
Give us
thinking of,
more. We want more.
I was thinking of Francis' How to Survive a Plague and also Schulman and Hubbard's United in Anger when we were talking about the AIDS activism. They're both documentaries that dealt with the AIDS activism and healthcare issues. Alexander Chee did a great essay collection, again for adults, called How to Write an Autobiographical Novel. But there's some essays in there where he writes about growing up as a queer Korean American teenager, and then the work he did with AIDS activism when he was in his early 20s. So something like that, like we said, it'd be interesting to see a YA adaptation of some texts.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, I don't know, as a whole, like we were talking about this before we started too, I just want to see more the publishing hierarchy change some, like the fact that, you know, the last Publishers Weekly survey that was done still shows that the people in charge of publishing are still almost about 94, 95% white, and like, let's mix that up some, because then we might see an even greater expansion of stories.
Yeah, we can see increased diversity representation across the board. And I mean, that's what diversity is, right? Like, diversity is not the little check boxes that you check off on the census. Diversity is a rich tapestry of all the things that you are, and each person is their own rich tapestry. So, you know, I agree with you. I think by, first of all, dismantling white supremacy and big upping minorities is definitely a way that we can change things up. But I think what could come out of it is just so beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, confronting the issues, even like within the queer community, of racism, of transphobia,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely something that, you know, should have happened yesterday, but hopefully just, you know, more people writing, more people allowed in publishing will increase those voices, hopefully.
Yeah, I think those stories are so important too, is more stories that highlight the issues within the community too, that there are these different levels of experience that that need to be highlighted too. That different intersections need to be emphasized.
So was there anything else you guys wanted to add on or talk about, or?
Well, there's a couple that I could definitely recommend that are really great, like the Princeless series by Jeremy Whitley. Princeless starts off as, you know, this girl who's waiting to be rescued from a tower. He wrote a biracial character because his daughter is biracial, and he wanted her to have stories where she could see herself in them. And from the jump, it's very feminist leaning. It's very girl pro, and there's a lesbian character in it named Raven, who's the pirate princess. And Raven the pirate princess became so popular that she got her own series. So there's also a series by Jeremy Whitley that we carry at the library called Raven the Pirate Princess. Another one that I would recommend for tweens to teens would be As the Crow Flies by Melanie Gilman. That was another Black Eyed Susan book. It's about a girl who goes to camp. It's somewhat a religious camp, and she's struggling with her own queer identity. And then she meets, like, her camp buddy turns out to be a trans girl. So it's just beautifully written. The art is really cool. I would highly recommend it.
Let's see, if you're looking for another like lighter romantic comedy, like just a fun read, What If It's Us by Adam Silvera and Becky Albertalli is just a really great meet cute between two gay teens. There's some will they, won't they. There's some first times. It's just a very beautiful, fun little romance.
I think oddly that reminds me of one thing I'd like to see more of too, is like, I think meet cutes can be great, but I feel like there's an overabundance of them in YA at this point. And one thing I really loved about Aristotle and Dante was the emphasis on friendship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Through a good portion of the novel. So I'd like to see more of that, like just different queer friendships.
Yeah. You know, another one that comes to mind with that is Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. So like throughout most of the book, the main character, I think his name is Darius, is really exploring like his mental health and his Iranian identity. And those are like kind of the main thrusts. But like in the background, you have this like budding friendship with a boy he meets when he's visiting his family in Iran. But there's these like queer undertones in their relationship where you kind of feel like there might be more than just a friendship going on, but it's never fully explored. And I enjoyed that too, because it is kind of this like subtle thing that you're kind of putting your own interpretation on as you go. And even if they're not romantic, there's again this like willingness to let go of toxic masculinity, like a willingness to embrace their feelings and and create that like deep connection between two young men, that I think is important too.
Very cool.
I have one more that I want to recommend for younger readers. It's called Goldie Vance, by Hope Larson. And it kind of has like a Archie, Betty and Veronica vibe to it, meets Nancy Drew. And it's, again, very wholesome. It's about a girl whose family runs a beachside hotel. So she works part-time at her parents' hotel, but then she sort of solves mysteries full-time. And then, like, to my great delight, the young lady that she winds up having a crush on is a young lady. And it's just so sweetly, chastely put out there.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, so is there anything else you guys want to point out or talk about, or do we want to shout out the website? And
Yeah, I feel like we give people a good list, hopefully.
so yeah, definitely. If there's any titles that we popped up on screen or that you heard, definitely check out PGCMLS.info and go to Overdrive and Libby and see what we've got in our ebook stock.
Mm-hmm. And you can find Black Eyed Susan lists on our website as well.
And what is the Black Eyed Susan?
Black Eyed Susan is
again?
the State School Library Award for youth literature. Every state has their own award, and it's usually named after their state flower. So the Black Eyed Susans has been going for a good long time. And what's great about it in Maryland, it's not us who chooses the best books, quote unquote. We pick out a top 10 after reading hundreds of books, and then we let the kids vote on it. So the kids actually get to choose their, so like one of them that I showed at Astronaut Academy, that was a winner one year. The kids decided that was their favorite book of the year.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride.